Thank you all for being here and welcome. It's always nice to see everyone's smiling faces. Lauren, do you mind pulling up the slides for me? So we are the Hudson Valley Passive House Alliance. I've met many of you at our meetings, but we're virtual now, so our reach is kind of getting a little bit broader, which is exciting too. And we have folks on from beyond the Hudson Valley and even beyond New York State, including one of our featured speaker tonight. The Passive House Alliance, Hudson Valley's mission is to make passive building mainstream in the Hudson Valley, but of course also beyond. We want to work toward a low carbon future through training, advocacy for the passive house standard, and again, to kind of make it the mainstream because it needs to be. And I'm sure that sentiment will be echoed throughout our presentations tonight. As always, we welcome new members. There's no requirement for which passive house standard you're subscribing to. All are welcome, but it is vital for the strength and effectiveness of this organization to have a strong participation, and it gives you the right to vote or hold office, and it's also can earn you discounts at Phius and Phius events, including webinars and national conference, et cetera, and also gets you access to some training and online resources. Plus, as a chapter, we have a lot of different things going on and initiatives that we're working forward toward bringing the Phius curriculum into higher education, for example, creating like a CPHC or builder certification sponsorship, or scholarship rather, and building out a more kind of robust newsletter for our chapter. So there's a lot that we're doing. We have some funding for that, which is great. And anyone who's enthusiastic and inspired, like we are about Passive House, should get in touch and join our group to make this happen. So and also just back on membership, I have just a couple of announcements. I want to say a big thank you to Patrick Murphy, who had been on our board since the beginning, really, of this chapter. He has stepped down after serving many terms and done some great work for the chapter. And also Stephanie Bassler, who has been our VP for 2 consecutive terms. I want to thank her for her contribution and hard work. She's still on our board, but no longer VP, and instead like to welcome Carl Hansen from River Architects, who joined the board and is also now our VP. So, well, big thank you to Patrick Murphy and Lillian, not Lillian, also Lillian, but and Stephanie, and then welcome to Carl. And then I would be a little remiss if I didn't show off the fact that both Carl and Stephanie worked on Phius Design Award winners 2021 Phius Con. They were announced, so big, congratulations to them for making it happen. And I think we can talk a little bit more about their projects at the end during wrap up. And so this is our agenda. By now, you've probably all read it. I don't think I need to, I will just let the speakers talk for themselves, but and give the introduction they'd like. But again, we have Sash and Frame, who's our sponsor. Thank you for your generous sponsorship of this meeting. We're excited to learn about your product and the solutions you offer for Passive House. And then, of course, we're excited to have Tim McDonald and look forward to hearing about architecture, activism, and the new gravity. And then CPHCs, we did not get in advance this time, but for anyone who is looking for Phius CPHCs, please email us at info@pha-hv.org, and we can email you that code after. We are going to skip this slide because I don't think we have the audio for it today, and transition right into our presentations. Also should say thank you to our other sponsor, NYSERDA. They are our ongoing sponsor. And they are helping us do a lot of the kind of outreach work that we are doing currently through financial support, which has been great. So thank you, and I will pass it over now to Sash and Frame, Jeff Betts. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Is there a way for me to do, I didn't send anything in advance. Can I do screen share? I think I have the permission for that. I just need approval for it. It's not letting me do it. Lauren and Michelle, is that something you guys can?
Yep, I'm working on it. Let me
thanks.
see what's going on. Give me a second.
No worries.
At the bottom where it says screen share, Lauren, if you hit that box, you should be able to allow multiple people to share screen.
Okay, I did that now. Jeff, you should get an opportunity.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. Do the full screen. Make sure it doesn't disappear. There we go. So, hi everyone. I've been a participant in meetings on and off for the past few years, since leaving my role at Ecovative Design in Albany, New York, Green Island, working with everything from mushroom insulation, packaging, building materials, particle board, and then even into food and leather. That was my experience out of architecture school, and then moved on to a company called Case Window and Door just down the road in Green Island. And now I'm with a company that I founded with some partners, Sash and Frame, and we are also going to be located in Green Island, New York. So I cannot seem to escape that location, oddly enough. And so just to give a little background of our company, myself and my 5 partners in the business and our 5 employees, we are all really, we're an install company. We're getting into selling product, and I'll go into that a little bit. But I would not come to this meeting at this point. I kind of talked to Michelle and John, a few people about this. Like, we're not at the point where we're as well versed into the performance aspect of the pass-fast aspect of our product, but we picked European product because, as I'll present right now, we're experts in European fenestration, and you can't be in that field without there being an overlap into passive house. And I think that there's just inherent properties in European technology that they've been doing for decades that is what really drew all of us to join Case originally. 7 of us were actually employees at Case, and then left that company to start Sash and Frame. And we were working on projects at Case, all European, manufactured in the US. It's a phenomenal factory. Wood units, timber aluminum units, stainless steel, bronze cladding as well, and even frameless systems. But these projects were, although there were code requirements in places like Aspen and other parts of the world, they weren't exactly the most energy conscious houses. These are, 10 to 25,000 square foot homes, resort-like estates essentially, that the owners are putting anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 square feet of glazing in them. And the company Case, where we all came from, most of us, was really focused on the high-end market there. And myself, my partner Nick, my partner Eric, kind of led the sales, marketing, finance and management, and engineering and production, respectively. And we brought along kind of the heads of the engineering team and install team to start this company.
How much?
So we saw we saw an opportunity where installation was something that was very far overlooked on a lot of these projects. People are building bigger and bigger houses, more complex houses. A lot more people were using European fenestration or that style, nothing with a nail flange or anything like many contractors are used to. And we decided to kind of jump ship and start this venture right in the middle of the pandemic, right after it started. And we've been busy every single week. We've gone all over the country. We've been to California, Florida, Chicago, DC, all over New England and the Northeast. And our kind of directive has been to just focus on installation because it's something that we know about. We are constantly battling a lot of builders and architects on different installation details, like waterproofing details, caulking details, and a lot of things that we learned are inherent to European systems, which really focus on water tightness, air tightness, and a different approach to working with a building envelope. And a lot of those techniques, I think, are carried through in Passive House. And a lot of people are becoming more aware of these techniques because of Passive House, which is really encouraging. So for us, we're excited to see so many people, from going from these meetings a few years ago to now, so many more people being engaged in this and so many more people being interested in this type of fenestration. And all of our expertise, from some of us for 20 years, some of us, myself, for 3 at Case, all of that time working with European systems. I mean, nothing was imported. We were manufacturing everything in-house. So hardware systems, glass, profiles, scantlings for the wood systems, everything was manufactured or brought in overseas and then manufactured in-house, like the lineals were. So we are probably the only installation company in the country that has come from that background. So when you start looking at systems with Sagania or Hoppy or any other hardware system within what you're specifying for your project, we know those catalogs in and out. We've had to order those systems. We know the limitations. When you're working with different profile providers or different clad systems for your project, this is something we have an intimate knowledge of, not just from an observation standpoint, but from actually manufacturing it. And now we're installing it, and we've decided to move into actually selling the product, and we'll be opening a showroom in March in Troy, on Green Island. Well, Green Island, Troy, at the new Starbucks Island development that's there. And we've been, over the past year and a half, busy doing things like this. So still within that realm of high-end residences, where this is an art gallery, next door is the actual residence, and there was a skylight. Basically, every unit in this house was leaking and needed repairs. Big frameless system, large skylight with about 24-foot long panels that we sourced and put in. Or projects like this, where in downtown Troy, if you're familiar, where we put some large glass into a historic facade and kind of rebuilt the part of the facade structure. Interior steel units for a boathouse in Maine, going between the water and the actual interior.
Yeah,
and party barns.
We're not seeing the slides advancing.
Oh, it's. Let me just get out of the display mode and see if that makes a difference. So you're just gonna have to look at the background for it. So this is the Skylight project I mentioned that we've been working on. We've also been training with 475 to be kind of one of their main installers for their Skylight systems. And this is the project in Troy, the historic renovation that we did of this system, and then designed and had manufactured a custom entry vestibule, the boathouse with the steel units at the interior, and a party barn in Saratoga County. So these projects are not passive in any way, but they are where our expertise lies within installation, working with big units on large residences or custom projects with essentially the type of details and requirements that you just can't really work within for US style fenestration. So like we are very much not fans of US manufacturers of the typical windows like the Pella, the Marvin, the Andersons, and we really like working with European products. So we've partnered with Internorm, a company that has a pretty large presence in Montreal and Toronto, but otherwise they're probably one of Europe's largest manufacturers of windows and doors. Unilux, we're going to be working with their fine line system and an interior product from Lebo. And these products we chose because of what they kind of can offer for us and what they stand out for. So Internorm has some quirks compared to other manufacturers where they call their iTech innovations with some interesting laminations and then wood veneers for their clad systems. They only offer timber, aluminum, and PVC. Unilux, the fine line system, is a curtain wall system with integrated lift slides. And we're also selling wood product with Unilux. And those products are interesting in their own, but what I got to be honest, like we're not really advocates of the products here at this meeting. We're advocates of the process. That's what I think we really pay attention to. So we've been installing products for multiple window importers. Many of them are probably you're familiar with. They sell up and down the Hudson Valley, and we've just seen a lack of participation in the overall process from what many of these companies offer. So the logistics side of things, the warranty and repair and maintenance side of things, and also just going into like the shipping headaches that people deal with on projects, we just kept running into issues on projects that we'd install. No packing lists were sent, trucks were overloaded, no shipping diagrams, no one knows when anything's coming, 100% payment up front, just a lot of red flags for ordering construction materials. But it just seemed to be the industry norm for windows and doors that someone's importing. So that's what really made us interested in selling product and going from installation only to actually providing and installing. So one thing that's going to set us apart is we only plan on installing our own projects. We might get to an install assistance point with builders that we're familiar with or we've done multiple projects with, but our plan is to carry through the entire process from ordering, detailing everything in, not just pulling details from a stock catalog, but working with you to detail the installation process and sequencing and making sure that everything's accounted for so there's no mysteries. Working within the product line catalog to make sure that we're looking at every option possible and not just trying to get to the point where the sale's closed and then we realize that we should have ordered the profile 20 millimeters wider or with a specialty clip for installation or different considerations at the sill. Having this knowledge of the manufacturing side puts us in a unique point where we can actually really get in depth on the fenestration package. Most of what we've been looking at for selling product, we'd like to stay within this region also because we travel a lot for work for installation, and that can be very trying on everyone. So part of the other motivation for getting started in the Hudson Valley and locating up in Troy with a showroom is we want to be able to work closer to home. So we want to find places, a few hours away to drive to do both the install and the service on everything. So a lot of the passive house related questions to our product and what those different lines offer, I'd be interested in doing follow-ups on and hopefully sponsoring a future meeting and going in more detail, bringing samples, everything else once we can gather in person. But I just kind of wanted this to be an introduction to see kind of what we're getting into, introduce us as a new company, and hopefully we run into each other on a few projects in the future, whether that's just in the installation capacity or assistance or helping with details for install, or going even further into actually looking at some of the product that we offer. So pretty light presentation, not a lot of meat to not a lot of substance to the product we're offering. But again, I think that the process that we offer and the process that we go through, we see as more important than the product in many of these projects. I think that the product is interesting that we're selling. We did pick it for a reason, but there's quite a difference between finding someone that will import product for you, going through 3 to 4 different levels deep before you get to a manufacturer, to working with someone who actually is going to have their hands on the product with you 100% of the process. We just saw a lot of heartache on a lot of projects that I think could have been prevented with organizations that were a little bit more in tune with the actual full install, delivery, and helping through the entire process as a manufacturer would. If anybody's dealt directly with a manufacturer in the US, like a boutique one or a smaller one, that's kind of more the service that we'd like to focus on. And I think that as we start branching out and reaching out to more people, we're going to be here in Green Island and with our doors open and ready to accept visitors in March. So thanks for having us, and I'm really excited to actually start maybe doing more of these in person, like the last meeting, and see where that goes.
Go away. Thanks so much, Jeff. That was really great. I'm just waiting for Michelle to come back. I know we are going to go into some questions. I know there's one question in the chat. Thoughts on products from a company like Alpine, since they're US based? Thanks to Seth for that question.
Are they manufacturing in the US?
Seth, I'll let you answer that.
He said yes.
Interesting. I mean, I think that there's value in that. It's nice to see that companies are manufacturing windows and doors, like high performance windows and doors in the US, but my bigger question for product like this is again, it's back to the process. A lot of the products are like a standard European tilt turn window. I mean, you can buy scantlings from Munchinger with foam already in them. You can buy clad systems with foam on them. Like, you can piece together a high performing window from anyone. Anyone can make that. I mean, we could do that in a garage and come up with a good design. So beyond the product performance and price, really where we're interested in, where we saw the biggest value add in the industry right now, is everything else that goes with it. So there are many companies that have like a wide sales network, but like, we're the ones they call to do maintenance and follow-up, and also what warranties are worth anything for that. So I think it is encouraging to see that there's a company like Alpine providing windows and making them here. And that means something probably more for a warranty than if you're getting something imported and there's no installation with that, because at the end of the day, that whoever's actually installing the window is going to be held to more scrutiny than the actual company if there's a problem with it. I don't think there's a number of companies too that are manufacturing in the US, and they know that they have something unique. So typically the price point, there's a little bit more margin there might be a little more margin on the product, just because they can do that, because they're avoiding shipping costs. And that's the only thing. Like, you might price a company locally that's manufacturing locally to a company that's importing and find that the price is relatively the same, even though the overhead might be the same. I mean, the GDP in Austria per person and in Germany is similar to the US. So the labor actually going into the product is going to cost everyone the same. The material should be relatively the same cost. And they might be importing things like hardware, but those are small shipments. So it's interesting when you cost compare things to find out like what the markup, like what's the real value of the product that you're buying, and knowing what like list price is, asking for list price on a lot of things versus just what the final price is that you receive from someone. So if I were to vet someone like Alpine Windows to start with, or any company, just to use that as an example, the things I would look at mostly would be outside of performance, warranty, and what hardware system they're using, and the details, and just kind of talking through them with what kind of support they offer after install.
Yeah, my concern is almost all those other stuff, but also for the global warming, the emitted CO2. So whenever anything is freighted further, and you have a really high carbon footprint. So it's nice to see something as close to the product site as possible. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if anybody's ever familiar with like Mank Windows, I mean, they were going to open something in Chicopee, Mass, and they had everyone was rooting for them to start a factory relatively close to us. And there are companies like Wythe manufacturing windows in New Jersey, I believe, for PVC, and Cumberling down in, I think, Florida or Alabama. And there are companies that are doing this, but I think that, yeah, I mean, they're getting containers of glass. They might be getting containers of hardware. It definitely is, it's a lot more spread out, so you're not just looking at it per project. So that definitely is a lot more embodied energy in the actual project when you look at shipping stuff directly for that versus a factory that might have 20 projects worth of hardware in a container, or 2 projects worth of glass. It gets spread out a bit, but I think there's still going to be a lot of energy in any project, regardless of where it's actually built. In Alpine, I don't know, shipping by truck from Colorado is still going to add something to it. And yeah, it's interesting that they've been doing that out there. It's definitely it definitely surprises me that more people aren't doing this in the US. But I think we're getting there. It'll happen soon enough. And if they use PVC products, I imagine, I don't know if they have that, but if for instance, if you're using a PVC lineal, there's only like one type of Cumberling profile that's made in the US. There's multiple profile types that are extruded, and Cumberling is a company that makes the lineals, and those are shipped. For some companies, they're shipped from overseas, and then they're assembled in that factory. So like, I'm looking at Alpine uses Rayhow hardware, or a Rayhow system, I believe. So I would be curious, are those lineals that make that PVC unit, is all that's happening is the corners are being welded here? Because at some point the lineals have to get to the US too. And with wood manufacturers, like at Case, we bought raw lumber and profiled everything down and laminated our own 3-layer scantlings. But many companies are buying scantlings from companies like Munchinger. And as an example, if you buy white oak, your white oak is coming from the US. So someone like Bingham and Lumber is taking the white oak from Pennsylvania, shipping it to Munchinger. They're turning it into scantlings, and then they're shipping it back to the US to a wood company to be turned into a profile. So although the final product isn't being shipped in a container, all that product has gone back and forth. And for Rayhow product, like, I don't know of anybody extruding a PVC profile other than Cumberling. Maybe Aluplast is getting there because they bought Chelsea Building Products, but the actual hardware, the profile, and really the only thing that might be produced in the US is the glass at that point. So it's unfortunately, being local doesn't really mean being local with European windows.
That's really interesting. And I'm impressed by your knowledge of how these components are getting shipped back and forth. James Hartford also posted in the chat about this, and the carbon footprint potentially not being higher for windows that are coming from Europe. So if you'd like to keep that thread going in the chat on the side, be interesting what other people are doing, where you're getting your windows from. Are you focusing on US manufactured windows? Or are you importing from Europe for your passive house projects, and maybe which is the dominant if you kind of switch it up between projects. It'd be interesting to see, to hear more from everyone in that chat as well. If there's not a lot of other questions, I know we have a couple more minutes allocated for that, but it didn't seem like there were a ton of questions coming up. So I'll give another moment, but then we could potentially move on and be done with this meeting a little sooner to start our evenings. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Jeff, for your presentation. It was very informative, and we certainly appreciate your sponsorship. If there's anyone on the call who might ever be interested in sponsoring our chapter presentations, please get in touch with us, and we'll be glad to set that up with you. We have sort of two levels of sponsorship. One is for our online meetings and another for our in-person meetings. They're run a little bit differently. We serve food and beer at our in-person ones, so that's a little bit a higher cost, but it's also a lot more fun. So without further ado, I'd like to kind of turn this over to Tim McDonald, who's gonna, who actually, our little chapter has been hoping to have Tim McDonald speak for one of our meetings for a very long time. So we're very excited that the time has finally come that we can host Tim as our featured speaker. So thank you, and take it away.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everybody for the invite. Can you see this full screen? All right, that's great. Well, again, thanks. I really appreciate it. I've got in typical fashion, I have way too many slides, but I kind of move quickly. I wanted to kind of pack in as much as I could to keep people excited. But first of all, those of you who don't know me, and it seems like I know a lot of people that are here, but just a little background. I'm an architect, a developer, and a builder, and we've been around since 1997. We also started a green roof and solar company to initially work on our own projects, but it kind of spun off into another company where that's kind of self-sustaining. But so my thinking about passive house and design and construction really comes from wearing those three hats. And as you'll see, cost is always an issue for me, and I think that'll come up a lot here. But I think the first thing that always comes up for me is, why are we doing this? Just to remind everybody that buildings are responsible for, close to half of all greenhouse gas emissions in this country. So those of you who don't know that, combine that with the fact that cities, because we're all moving back to cities by 2050, probably 75% of the world's population is going to be living in cities. Now it's over 50%. And cities with transportation and everything else going on, that's where 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. So cities and buildings, that's how we're going to solve this crisis. And if we don't take it on soon, we're in a lot of trouble, as everybody knows. It's what I call the new gravity of our time. It's that foundational. And just a little check-in as to where we actually are right now in our emissions. This is actually a year old. But if you imagine that peak emissions were in 2020, which they weren't, and we just drew a straight line down to 2050, which is what the Paris Climate Agreement and everything else is all about, that would be almost twice as much carbon emitted in that time frame as we have left to emit. So it's actually not that simple, even though that's pretty radical. It's this difficult. We have to radically shift the way we think about buildings and carbon in the next 9 years to reduce our energy consumption and therefore carbon emissions by 65% by 2030. And we don't have until 2050 anymore. Best case is 2040. So I'm not trying to be grim here. I'm just trying to state the obvious. And of course, you know, what do we mean? This is a really great document. I don't know if you guys know this. It's from the Red Cross of all organizations. And so their notion of cost here is humanitarian. It's also, they also talk about the cost for the financial cost for governments, for all of us. But I think everybody here is also interested in a different kind of cost. It's like, okay, it's really great. We've got to do all of this, but what does it actually cost to make buildings that are 75 to 80% more energy efficient? And I think what I hope that comes out of this is that you'll walk away thinking, there's no reason for me to be doing anything other than this, because cost is not an issue. But what are we talking about? We're talking about carbon neutral buildings by 2040, as I mentioned. And for me, I don't think about carbon neutrality from the perspective of carbon offsets. You can buy these carbon offsets over here and attribute them to your building. I think what we've got to do is design buildings that can manage their own resources on their own site, especially in urban environments. Now, the Hudson Valley is a different animal, but you've got plenty of urban conditions that deal with the same thing. And you've got plenty of buildings like this, with the typical row house in North America that uses about that much energy. And there's no way in hell that building on its own site could get to zero, because it would need a roof, you know, 5 times bigger than what it's got. So the great thing about Passive House is the reduction in the physical real estate of a building aligns kind of perfectly with the reduction in energy consumption that we all know of. Heating and cooling is over 50% of the issue. And we all know that the coat, the envelope, that's our best and cheapest approach to radically reducing the amount of energy and carbon these buildings emit. And that's the fabric first approach to Passive House that you all know. But I wanted to kind of, in thinking about this presentation, I thought, I kind of forgot when I started all this. And I did my Passive House training back in 2008. And I thought, you know, it might be actually helpful for people to see a couple of projects that, you know, we weren't born building passive houses, right? We came into this organically. And so I thought I might just show you some of the projects that kind of informed the direction of the work that we took on. Here's one of them. It's an 11-unit project. It was a dump site, frankly, in the middle of a really thriving neighborhood in Philadelphia called Fishtown. And in 2006, we completed this. So we started it maybe 2003 or 4. But this is what it looked like. It was a dump site for a masonry contractor for about 25 years. So he just filled the buildings up with his trash. That's pigeon shit in my shovel. So probably should have taken these buildings down, but we didn't. We really treated them. We were really interested in this. First of all, it was this really unique factory in the middle. It was a rag factory in the middle of this residential neighborhood. And we wanted to kind of keep as much of the fabric there as possible. But then we also wanted to look carefully in terms of how the design of this community, this new community, would be informed. And so we looked really closely, like right next door, and discovered this very common building typology in Philadelphia called the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost house. 1 room per floor, these tiny little buildings that got built in the 18th and 19th century, really, really cheap. We've been fascinated by them. And so we said, maybe we can kind of rethink this this old typology in a contemporary way. And so, you know, these things were built in rows over time, additions would be built on to create a kind of typical row house as a family grew and expanded. And so we said, well, why don't we take some clues there, but start those extensions more three-dimensionally around a building, and then let's actually bring into the picture some contemporary issues like what we do, views and outdoor space and those kinds of amenities that are more contemporary, not so much 200 years ago, and then reposition those kind of newfound trinities next to each other, kind of weaving this green space in between, and then looking for how do we clothe these buildings, how do they present themselves. We just looked around the blocks, and this diversity of color and texture and building typologies is what kind of informed these trinities for us. And then there was another section of the site that used to have these old row houses. So here's another typology. Then there's classic industrial building that gets retrofitted into residential is another typology typical in Philadelphia. And then this kind of pavilion steel and concrete structure. And it was really an attempt to create a microcosm of an urban environment, and what might it mean to kind of live in this intimate environment. That was one of the goals of the project. And so here's what you see in plan. And here are some of the images. These trinities, you can walk outside on every single level. The roofs are fully occupied. There's a barbecue on the roof, the top roof, and there's a dumbwaiter that goes from the kitchen all the way to the roof, so you can bring your food up 4 stories through the dumbwaiter. Just some examples of how these the kind of public and private spaces that get created. But it was also the first time with my brother Patrick, who's a partner in the firm at that point. He got really excited about sustainability. I wasn't even interested in sustainability at the time, and he's the one that suggested that we maybe generate our own power here. And I said, wow, Pat, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you go figure it out? So he went and literally got licensed in Florida, came back and installed this. And I was kind of blown away by him. And, these buildings have nothing to do with Passive House, no attention to detail around an envelope. Look at that envelope. Are you kidding me? Even the Tyvek is horrible on it. He also said, that's him there. He also said, and I'm not throwing any rainwater into the sewer. I'm not letting it happen. He's a plumber, and he hates when I say that he's a plumber because he's so much more than a plumber, but he's a plumber. And he said, I'm not dumping rainwater. I'm not treating rainwater down at the sewage treatment plant. I'm not dumping it into poop water. And we said, okay. So he created his own, he got these concrete detention boxes really inexpensively, and just pieced them together and filtered the water between them. And they're about 6,000 gallons, and we pumped them back to irrigate all the landscape around. It was also our first attempt at a green roof. Lots of fun things about that. And so that kicked us off into this like exploration about what sustainability was. LEED, I don't even think existed at that time. And then I think it was a year or two later, we learned about LEED, and it was a fantastic structure within which we could kind of hold ourselves accountable for the things we said we wanted to do. And so this wasn't our first. We had built some LEED gold projects before this, but this is our first LEED platinum project that we did in Philadelphia called Thin Flats. And it's 9 units. They're duplexes in a single family dwelling on the left-hand side. And just some ideas behind that. This is a south-facing facade. So, I wasn't as rigorous as I should have been because I hadn't learned about Passive House at that moment. But we knew enough to say, what if that facade had a real depth to it? Number one, we could create outdoor balconies. Number two, we could manage the sun in the summertime. So it could be a solar shading device. It could also do things like, this is the basement level. Second means of egress allows us to bring glazing down into the basement. So the basements actually are filled with light. This was the opening night. And there it is, 2008. Oh, the next day, Lehman Brothers collapsed. Remember that? That was fun. Won't go into that. Here's the, this was a 3-wheeled electric truck that we offered people if they purchased, we just figured, you know, we give them refrigerators. Why not promote electric vehicles? These are the only ones that existed at the time from China, lasted about a year. These are duplexes. So the ground floor and basement are one unit with this garden in the back, and then the upper 2 floors are another unit with this garden on the roof. And this was, again, the kind of evolution of the value of a roof in our kind of education. We started to get much more serious about the role that roofs play. You guys have probably heard me say this before, but I'm a big fan of a good idea being something that functions in at least 3 ways. So if a roof only sheds water, it's not a good idea. But if it manages stormwater, generates power, you know, creates habitat for living beings, reduces cooling loads, it starts to become a good idea. And so that's what we did here. These are 60-foot deep buildings and only 18 feet wide. You've only got light coming in from the ends. And so this notion of a skylight bringing light all the way through, not so much the entire building because they're separate units, but down through the first 2 floors, bringing that borrowed light through transoms into every single room in the house. So you don't turn lights on during the day. And so we thought, you know, we had arrived. It was like, we knew everything there was to know about sustainability. And LEED was great. It was this awesome, rigorous standard, but we just continued to, we realized that the majority of this stuff we were doing anyway, it was just intelligent, thoughtful stuff. But the real work, the real challenge, which was not so much at the time emphasized in LEED, was the whole energy portion of it. And that's when I discovered Passive House. And this was our first real passive house attempt at a passive house project in 2010. We completed in 2012. This is our first affordable housing project we'd ever done, first modular project we'd ever done, and first attempt at a passive house. And we had 3 months to build it. That's another, you can ask me about that later. These are 3 3-story townhouses for formerly homeless families, large families. Became the first certified passive house project in Pennsylvania. And at the time, we were convinced that not only do you have to rethink how you design buildings, but you have to rethink how you build them. And so we unfortunately joined forces with a steel and concrete modular company. And we said we wanted to bring wood into their factory, and we wanted it to be a high performance factory. And they were really open and awesome until they weren't. They were horrible business partners. It was the worst business we'd ever entered. But the great news is we got a series of passive houses out of it that cost us dearly. And here it is. These houses went up from foundation to certificate of occupancy in 3 months. And you'll notice it's a 2x6 stud wall. This tiny little detail here was, you know, it took us months to figure out. Why don't you just line up the window with the air barrier so that you don't have any bends in the tape? Really simple. And then rigid insulation, rain screen, boom, Bob's your uncle. Very simple detailing, exactly the way they're building already in the factory, except for the exterior insulation. First attempt at a blower door test, and we nailed it. I'm not patting myself on the back. It wasn't that difficult, to be honest. And those of you who have never seen a thermal image of a passive house next to a normal house, this is what it looks like. You know, we're heating the outside all the time with our code built buildings. Awesome, simple houses with good quality materials, lots of light. We couldn't get Jeff's windows at the time. Would have loved to met you back then, Jeff. These came from Ireland. The only way to get triple pane windows at the time. They were pretty great. 5 kW array on the roof. I've got a whole presentation about what happened when it came to the energy consumption in these buildings, which I can't go into right now. But that 5 kW was designed to get it to 0. And it didn't quite get there for some really interesting reasons. But we built it for about $130 a square foot at the time. And I'm telling you, you can't, you know, affordable housing, that's below what typical affordable housing is. So we started to actually investigate how affordable housing got funded. And we were just asking, look, if we can do this, why isn't all affordable housing doing this? And so we learned about housing finance agency. I had agencies, I had no idea about the low-income housing tax credit and how these projects got funded. But we learned really quickly. We went to them with a whole group of us all throughout Pennsylvania. And we said, why don't you just make all affordable housing capable of getting to 0 by 2030? And they were actually really open to it. And we said, and of course, this isn't the goal, this is the tool. Passive House is the best tool. So, and then they said, yeah, we'll look into that. And I said, well, how are you going to do it? And they said, the QAP. And I didn't know what that was. It's a point-based system that developers apply for. They're extremely competitive. It takes you like 3 years before you get funded typically. So that competition became the secret sauce. And I hadn't noticed when they suggested the QAP as the way to make this happen. I hadn't realized how important it was going to be. But here's what happened. It's a typically you try to get as many of those 120 points as you can. Some of these are required, but a lot of them are optional points. So PHFA said, let's just throw some extra optional points in there for Passive House, see what people do. We called them leverage points because again, competitively, you can lose your funding for that year if you're 1 point below somebody else. So this idea of an extra 10 points to build to the Passive House standard, what a cool idea. And so in the first year, 85 projects came in, 39 were awarded funding. But here's the most important one. 38% of the projects came in as Passive House projects. And then they awarded 8 of them funding. And these are like, 50, 60 unit projects, 60 units each. And the most important part here is that the costs were negligibly different. And here are all those costs. This is all of those projects that applied. And the yellow and orange are the Passive House ones. The orange are the ones that actually got funded. The yellow were the ones that applied. And I averaged all these out and then compared them to the white projects, which are the code built projects. And it turns out the Passive House projects, and again, 75% less energy, and they came in at 2.5% more than the code built projects. And so PHFA said, that's absurd. They can do that within their contingencies. This is awesome. And so they funded, in the end, one dropped out. 7 of these were built. Here's what happened. So this cost analysis was at the application stage. This cost analysis was after they were built. So the non-Passive House projects at application, code built projects were $171 a square foot on average. They came in 3% higher within their contingency. Passive house, they were lower. That doesn't mean so much. Don't worry about that number. It's really the final number. And the takeaway here is these are developers, architects, builders, engineers that had never done passive house before. First shot. And they did them on budget. Next year, maybe that was a fluke. They awarded 10 projects, not 7. Same thing. We averaged out all the numbers, and there it is. Somehow it flipped. And to me, it doesn't matter whether it's 2% above, 2% below. It's just, that's not the point. The point is, how is it that these developers and builders are building this stuff within the budgets that they have? Well, it's very simple. When you must, you do. And that is the leverage that was created by this funding mechanism. And here they all are. These are all built now. The next 3 and 4 year, it was a combined 3rd and 4th year. They awarded 8 more, and the exact same thing happened. So this is not about me as a developer telling you, we did it, you can do it. This is hundreds, not hundreds, maybe what, 10, 20 or 30 developers, 30 projects that got built to the passive house standard on budget, right? And they figured it out. Here's one of them, and I love this, and I'm just going to zip through this. I was only the passive house consultant on this, but 49 unit veteran housing. We use some prefabricated stuff. You'll see guided them prefabricated foundation, prefabricated walls, built in, I think they say 4 months on their construction, because these walls have the triple pane windows and doors already installed in them. First attempt, pre-drywall blower door test, we hit 0.5 ACH 50. Final test 0.42. Again, these guys had never done it before. Frankly, neither had I, aside from that small project. But here's the most important part of that project for me. This guy Chip, he said, you know what? I'm gonna if we're using a lot less energy in terms of utilities, I should be able to recoup that. So these are the typical. Let's just look at the 1 bedrooms. This is typically what is allowed in terms of utilities. Remember, affordable housing charges people 30% of their income for rent and utilities. Well, what happens when the utilities go down? Does the rent go up? So this is what he argued. He argued, you know what, we're cutting this, and he was conservative. He said, we're going to have less than half of those utilities. So I should be able to have more rent, more revenue coming in, right? And if I have more revenue coming in, I should be able to pull a larger mortgage out. And he did. He pulled $200,000 more debt out of this project because he had the revenue to cover it. And his perspective is this: passive house allows me to borrow or leverage more money to build more housing. So he didn't take that 200 grand and go buy a boat. He took that 200 grand and went and built more housing with it. And that's what I loved about this project. Here it is completed. And then we took this very simple idea of like 1 paragraph in the QAP, extra 10 points that we did in Pennsylvania, and we took it around so far to 39 other states. And here they are, 17, and I think this is changing by the week, by the month these days. I think there might be more housing finance agencies that have done something similar to Pennsylvania. But here they all are. And as you know, there's a lot of passive house going on in these states, including yours. But even the ones that don't have those extra points in their QAP, they're building passive house anyway. That's why I say these other ones are on their way. And here are some examples of them. Maine, tons of passive house going on up there. And just to let you know, we have this conference every year that specifically focuses on passive house and affordable housing that you should be a part of if you haven't ever been, called the New Gravity. So look, that's how this passive house stuff kind of affected a policy initiative that we took on, but we were still building stuff in the middle of all this. This has taken, we started that in 2014, and it is where it is right now. But in the process, we were still gung-ho about developing these multifamily projects. So this project Stable Flats, 26 townhomes that we oriented south so we can manage the sun. Again, we built, the company was still alive at the time. We built 3 of these 26 homes in the factory. They went up really easily. All the materials, I'm a big fan of modular, but you just got to have the right team. Modular is a great idea. There just aren't a lot of great modular companies out there. It's kind of like builders. How many builders do you know? How many good builders do you know? There they are, about 4 kW on the roof. Could house another 4 kW if we wanted to. This is just a tiny example. Like this guy bought 2 lots, and we redesigned the 2 lots into 1 home for him. It's kind of an insane house. PV and stormwater management work really well together because the temperature is reduced on the roof with the green roof, and reduced temperatures allow PV to work more efficiently. Hit the blower door test at $150 a square foot. These are using, again, all electric buildings. We haven't put gas in a building in 15, 20 years. These are 2,500 square foot homes, and all utilities per month average about $90 a month. And if they put another 4 kW on the roof, they probably get to 0. Right around the corner from this, and next door to the Thin Flats project, right across the street from it, is a project called the Battery. It's phase 3. This was actually a 3-phase project, which took 18 years in total. And we were children here, and then we were high school here, and then we had graduated college here. That's the way I look at it, kind of an organic way of seeing how we've kind of grown as a company. But this is a 25-unit apartment building, all centralized systems. Ground floor, we were required to have parking, so lobby and a couple of units on the ground floor, and then this very simple double-loaded corridor with mostly 1 bedrooms, a couple 2 bedrooms. But instead of modular here, we panelized this, and our envelope showed up on our site in these packages. We unpacked them. The building went up, and I think it went up in half the time. So in the end, I think we saved 4 or 5 months. And those of you who are developers, just do the numbers on that in your pro forma. You start generating revenue 4 or 5 months earlier. What does that do to your capital costs? Centralized ERVs on the roof. I call them the lungs of the building, and here they are. Here are those lungs feeding and exhausting each one of these units. Some fun, complicated detailing as that ERV meets the super insulated roof. Stupidly, we drilled 2 1,000-foot wells into the ground. This is a section of the building. Isn't that great? That's 1,000 feet that we drilled. I can't believe we did it. We've had nothing but trouble with it, but it's working well now. We've had nothing but trouble for the first couple of years, and now it's working great. But that's doing the heating, cooling, and domestic hot water for the whole building. And those of you who are concerned about, oh my God, you're going to have a whole ventilation system and heating and cooling, and they got to be separate and all of that stuff. Well, this is how we did it. We ducted the air, the ventilation air only, and then we just had 1 wall-mounted ductless mini split in these 1-bedroom units. We didn't need to duct it. It's been fine. We just have this open transom that people have asked if we could close it up, and we have, and it's still fine. So it's another thing we tried out here, we experimented with here, was we just thought, why are we putting, like, why do we have an entire room taken up by individual meters? Because everybody tells us that we should individually meter everybody, but we did the numbers and we said, for $15 a month, like, really, you want to take up that much space and spend all that money on all these meters? Why don't we just give it a shot with 1 meter, have 1 meter, and then we just built into their leases the idea of a $50 a month flat fee, and if they went above it, we could raise their rent the following year, and it seems to be working. Boom, hit the blower door test here, and there it is. There's our it's called the battery, and these white panels have these LED lights that are tied into the energy monitoring system, but they're also linked back to each individual apartment. So I call it the who's who facade, because when you're coming home for dinner and you don't know who this is, but you wonder, maybe it's like this guy, and you live right here, and maybe it's you don't even know. And so this kind of creates a conversation among people in the building, but it also creates a conversation around people, or could create a conversation around people in the neighborhood as well. First certified passive house project of that scale for us, and built for just under $170 a square foot at the time. This was code built construction in the neighborhood. Here's that parking zone. And then we just, the facade, so these white panels have these LED lights, but they're also solar shading devices. And then we built this huge solar array on the roof and said, you know what, we've got to have this beautiful green space. It's a very tight site. So we turned it into this wonderful place for people to go up and hang out. And the secondary benefit of the solar is that it keeps the really hot sun off in humid Philadelphia in the summertime. Very simple, but again, good quality materials. We make everything ourselves, like we made all of our doors. We find it's cheaper. I mean, and it's cool. It's like a little handmade MDF door with a hole in it for hardware. And people love it. They think it's kind of feels handcrafted and unique. Yeah. We're monitoring rather than metering. If you're monitoring, why meter? And so here's that monitoring for the year 2020. We've got an EUI of 10 compared to some analysis that Beverly Craig of Mass CEC and some other folks have done. A typical affordable housing code built building has an EUI of 59, so 83% better than code. It's kind of right in line with what we said we could do. We're not here yet, but we've got these electric EV chargers out here, and we can't wait until these bi-directional chargers come, because the thought is this, that we would purchase a series of, I don't know, like 2016 Priuses or something, and we'd tell tenants that they don't have to own a car, and that they have this car share service. They can use it whenever they want, but the intention is to then use the battery in the car as a way to manage the peak load demand, because the peak load demand in this building is responsible for half the electric bill. So we're exploring that now, but the chargers aren't there. All right, last project I want to show you is this one. It's one we just completed about a year ago, 28 apartments. And I show this after the one before that because we completely changed everything about how we thought about mechanical systems here. Very much decentralized. And obviously the thing that's kind of sticks out the most here is this solar facade. which I'll talk about in a second, $180 a square foot, in line with construction costs at the time. Here it is from above. We carved out this is the south facade. We carved out this kind of terrace in order to have the basement, which is our office, walk out to grade, and it's a really nice garden. Here's our meeting room, our conference room that we never use. Frankly, we never use the office. So is COVID. But that facade is floating 24 inches away from the building. And it's for 3 reasons. Well, the floating is for 2 reasons. One, to shade in the summertime. You just have to, in these dense, internally heat-loaded buildings, you just got to keep the direct sun out in the summertime. But you got to let it in the wintertime. And because it's this tight urban site, it also keeps people from looking into your apartment as well. Similar roof. This is what our roofs are going to look like on all our buildings. And this is what I encourage you all to have all of your roofs look like. Have it function in at least 3 ways. And so our projection was that the residential portion of the building would consume this, and that the solar would produce this, creating a net positive building. And that's exactly what happened over the first year. And that 26,000 kWh, we just kind of gave it over to the office. And so it's not quite a net zero building with the office, but we never intended the office to be that way. Again, prefabricated envelope system, again, but we dropped the fee this time because we're generating so much solar. But the important thing about this for this conversation around cost is that we're quickly arriving at PV not being one of these things that, oh, solar ready, you do it later. There is no reason to do it later. Do it now. It's not just a cost in your capital cost in your budget. It's a revenue generating device right now for us. This is making us money. Decentralized system with a Minutair. Those of you who don't know it, it's great. It's a great unit because it's got an ERV heat pump in it. There's the condenser and the evaporator are inside, so you're not running line sets. You're not filling your roof or your ground with condensers. Very simple. It fits in these tiny apartments. These are 450 square foot apartments, but we built it into the kind of cabinetry of the kitchen, and you wouldn't even know. And you've got extra storage space, these drawers below. So here are these. This is a 450 square foot. This is a 320 square foot studio. This is a Murphy bed that folds down and then folds back up. Really quickly, for architects out there whose eyes are glazing over about the kWh and BTUs all evening. We also care about design, and we just have a lot of fun. And we're also, when you make a 450 square foot apartment, every inch matters. And so we said, let's rethink the bathroom because it takes up a lot of freaking space in these apartments. What if it became this long, thin bathroom that really increased the living space? And so Marcel Duchamp taught me many, many years ago how to do it. What if your door was closed in one direction and it closed the shower off, and it allowed, this is your entry into the apartment. So this is a hallway. So it allowed that to happen. So your sink and toilet are here, your shower is here, but you close it in the other direction. So you close it that way, close off the shower, never see the shower. But then when you close it from the living room, everything in here is perfectly situated. It's the wet stuff of the entire apartment. Your washer and dryer is here. You walk out. So this becomes part of the bathroom. People think it's fun. And then the next thing to nail in a multifamily passive house is the hot water, because heating and cooling is now easy. Hot water is difficult in 2 ways. One, to not bring gas in. Everybody wants to bring gas in for the boiler to make a centralized boiler to do all the hot water. That's one reason. The second reason is we started to say these centralized systems require these massive recirc loops. And these recirc loops use a lot of power. And so what if we started thinking about the servicing of the hot water the way we're taking sewage out of the building, and plumbing stacks and venting codes around venting are based on a vertical stack with very short horizontal runs to these fixtures. Well, what if we did the exact same thing with water and created these stacks directly below the bathrooms and kitchens, very short horizontal runs to the fixtures, and then the recirc, what if we put the recirc loop inside the supply? You would have one pipe that you had to insulate rather than two. And so this, by a company, these two fittings on the top and the bottom by a company called Viega, allows the water, this is the supply line to each floor, allows the water to then go right back into the center of the pipe and come out. And so we've cut the piping in half, we've cut the insulation in half, we've cut the cost of the heating. Oh, geez, sorry. I just lost my screen. Oh, there we go. And we cut the cost of the equipment in half. These are heat pump water heaters. They cost, we were going to go with Sandon, it cut the cost in half. So that's the next threshold. I want somebody else to come up with something else, but that's what we're going with right now. And there they are, working beautifully together. And there it is, beautifully designed to fit within its historic context. And the last thing these are the projects that we've been working on the past couple of years, because we're totally excited about everything that we do. This is, we're working with RMI and their Realize retrofit program. We're doing a project in Boston. This is a really cool single family home in Pennsylvania. This is my partner's house completed. This is a 88 unit project we designed for a site that we own. This is a project that went away, 692 units. This is a project that we lost competition for, but we just keep going for it. This is another one we lost a competition for, but we keep going. This is one that's under construction now. It's a retrofit project in Baltimore. There's another one that we lost. So we lose more, almost, yeah, we definitely lose more than we win. There's another one we lost, but we fully designed it. This is one we're working on. We're really excited about in Louisville, Kentucky. It's a huge project that's changing as we speak, but it's a fascinating one you'll hear more about later. This is one that was built in Erie, PA. This is one that went away because the developer lost the site, and this is one we're waiting on. So look, probably went over, but the last thing I'll leave you with are these, and I'll just shut up and you can ask some questions. I'll leave this up.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
That's great. And no, you did not go over, and we certainly have a bunch of time now for questions, and there are some, yeah, in the chat. So
I'm looking at them now. Should I just go one by one?
You can go one by one. You can, invite the person to ask the question out loud, or just answer it yourself, whichever.
Okay. Oh, hi, Ed. Ed, who works with us. Hi. James. Hi, James. Did you have to fight the fire department on installing PV right up to the roof edge? We're often told we need to keep back 3 feet from the edge. Here's one of those situations where I think they changed the code after this project. I don't think they'll allow this again, because so no, we didn't. We had no issues. It sailed through permitting, not one question. But there was a really great article that came out about the project in Philadelphia, and the fire department read the article, and the next day they emailed me and said, we want to come and look at this, please. And so they came, two of them came, and they said, I don't know how this was allowed, but we got to see that this is safe. And I said, no problem. And so I went up and I showed them, because it looks from the outside like it's totally opaque and you can't get out your window and all of that, you know, and you can't get off the roof. And so we walked through it and they said, huh, well, we probably won't allow this again, but it does seem safe.
And then you've got the your canopy now, so that, you know, avoids that whole issue of the 3-foot setback.
Yeah, I mean, so that changes by jurisdiction, that 3 feet. And I think, you know, one could argue, and we haven't had to yet, that if it's on the roof itself, I understand the 3-foot setback issue, right? But what if it's above all access to the roof? And if the roof is only mechanical access or anyway, I think you could argue if it's 10 feet above the roof, then that setback should maybe be reconsidered. But yeah, we haven't hit that again. Tim, were the prefabricated panels assembled by Blueprint? No, it was a Build Smart out of Kansas City. Love Blueprint Robotics. We've tried to work with them on so many projects, but projects haven't happened. But really excited for the day when we do work with them. Reed looks like Build Smart. Yep. Build Smart. Yep. Yep. I can share the slides. I propose, oh, this is James again. A PVHV field trip in Philadelphia. Well, you can do that. By the way, I don't live in Philly anymore. I'm in Massachusetts. I moved here in September, so you'll have to meet my surly brother if you go to Philly. The second, James. Oh yeah, James, you and I have been. Yeah, you have. That's right. Michelle, question: how is emergency power handled? There isn't emergency power. I mean, it's handled by building a passive house. We don't have backup generators. We don't have. I mean, the intention again of the it's called, what is it called? V2B, vehicle to building. The intention of that is for the electric vehicles eventually. I mean, this sounds really cool and wild, but in 5 years, certainly 10 years, people are going to be like, yeah, what's the big deal? Of course we use our battery to back up our building. We don't need a gas line. Because some people, I've worked with developers that say, okay, well, we don't need to put gas in for our hot water or appliances or anything like that, or even the dryers, it's hard to get them to say no to, but they'll bring a gas line in just for the backup generators. And I think it's absurd, but whatever. So it's going to be all electric. And so the cars are going to do that for you. Who makes that pipe and pipe? Viega. Yes. You can't find it? I'll connect Kramer. I'll connect you to them. It's hard to find. It's hard to find. And guess what? I didn't figure this one out. Gary Klein. And I will shout that man's name to the heavens. I love that man. He is the hot water guru of North America. And I forgot to even tell you that he's the one that when I went to him and I said, I don't want to do this. It was actually at a drunken party at Joe Steebrook's house. What is it called? Summer camp. Yeah. Like everything is drunken and fun at Joe Steebrook's house. We sat there all night long talking about hot water. And I was totally fascinated. He's the one that helped design this whole system and found Viega with this pipe and pipe. And he said nobody had ever tried it before. And I said, well, this sounds amazing. I mean, I was raised as a plumber. My dad was a plumber. So hot water's in my veins. So I was totally excited when I found that out. Amen for Gary Klein. Anything else? Are all of your projects, including your single family like Rest House, also prefab? No, they're not. Is there ever a case when you go away from prefab? I mean, look, the reality is it's just really hard. There aren't enough companies out there. We used to be totally in the modular world, but man, the research that we've done, you know, out of 200 modular factories in Pennsylvania at one time, we narrowed down to one factory that had the capital assets to back up. This is going to be like a 250 unit project that we were going to do. In other words, the modular industry, at least at that time, wasn't set up for multifamily. It was mostly single family. And so there were a few that did multifamily. And the ones that did multifamily, they sure as hell weren't interested in retooling their factory in order to do this passive house thing. So there just aren't enough panelized manufacturers, modular prefabrication in general in this country. So it's hard to, like for instance, Blueprint Robotics, they were going to be our builder for every project we would do from now on. Well, now they're overwhelmed, and they're only doing, they were going to be our prefab project company for our Realize, these exterior retrofit projects that we're going to be doing, and they can't handle it. They're overwhelmed. And so we need like 20 more companies like Blueprint Robotics. So, but I have yet to build a project stick by stick for maybe 10 or 15 years. I'm probably going to have to start soon.
I have a question related to that, if I can just butt in. But I have a project now that's looking to build passive house modular, and this company has never done anything passive house, and I'm not even sure they've done anything high performance. So how scared should I be?
Well, you shouldn't be scared. And what you should do is, I mean, that was the whole point of that. We called it at the time, we tried to get a patent for it, and you can't patent. It's very difficult to get a patent for our SBS, our sustainable building system. I'll just give you the details. Like, it's so straightforward. You just have to pay attention to a couple of really important things, like showing them how to install a window, telling them what an air barrier is. Like, it's really not that difficult. So I'm not a fan of being afraid. In fact, I love fear because it motivates me to like dig in even harder. So yeah, get afraid, but don't walk away because you're afraid.
Dig in.
Like, dig in, because we got to train. Somebody's got to train these modular factories and other men. Who's going to do it? People that know how to do it. Are there any specific changes to your approach you have in mind for your next round of projects? Do you expect? Yeah, we're using the Minotaur a lot, actually, on our retrofit project. And I know it sounds like, because I talk about them too much, it sounds like I'm a rep for them, and I'm not. But look, it's the same thing with these units. When we started building, learning about passive house, the Germans would tell us that, and the Irish would tell us that, oh yeah, you reduce your energy consumption, and so you're significantly reducing your heating plant. And they always said heating plant. Of course, it took a while for me to realize that they weren't saying cooling plant, because they don't have freaking cooling. So what I was finding was we were doubling the cost of our mechanical systems in these early passive house buildings, because you had to have a completely separate ventilation system from heating and cooling, and you never mix the two. And I was always looking for the magic box that I saw 15 years ago in Europe, which looked like a refrigerator, and it had an ERV, a heat pump, and a freaking tank of water. So the heat pump did hot water, heating, cooling, dehumidification, and ventilation. And I've been looking for that since we started. And this is the closest thing to that. But it doesn't have hot water connected to it. But it's the same as modular and panelized companies. We need like 20 more companies. We need Mitsubishi, we need Fujitsu, we need everybody to come out with these magic boxes, because I think they're really cost effective and they make things simple rather than complicated and expensive. Failures or issues with the Minutair. Did have some failures, but they had nothing to do with Minutair. They had to do with the installation of the, I had 4 units, I had 4 apartments complain in the middle of the heat wave this summer that their apartments were not cooling down. And those of you who know how these things work, there's a supply and an exhaust that goes to the outside. On the exhaust, you put a damper that opens, that goes like this, right? Well, what happens if, what happened was one guy showed up for one day and installed 4 units, and he installed them backwards. And so he put the supply connected to the exhaust and the exhaust connected to supply. So he's trying to pull air through the damper. So we discovered that and fixed it, but no problems with the Minutair itself. In fact, the software inside the Minutair told us that there was a blockage. And I said, you guys are crazy. What are you talking about? There's no blockage. I'm looking at the pipe. And anyway, the blockage was the damper, and the software knew. Anything else? What? Did I miss some? I probably did.
Let's see. CERV instead of Minutair.
See,
have you
the
used
serve too?
that?
I try. I looked into that for this project, the one for the Minutair project, and they told me that they didn't have the cool. They said that it could supplement the heating and cooling, but it couldn't handle the cooling loads of the apartments, which I found really strange. I couldn't believe it.
That lines up with what I've seen, but I think Apaca is another unit.
Apaca we've looked into,
yeah,
and we've explored it for a couple of projects. We're just not. First of all, the pricing is more, and the ducting is really. We literally. It's one thing to look at a brochure and to see this beautiful machine sitting on a wall. Oh my God, it's so sweet. It's from Italy. And there are 2 units. One just does heating and cooling, and one does heating, cooling, and ventilation. But then you dig in, and I was like, okay, let's pull this one apart. And we did a 3D model in Revit about how you would duct that thing. And it was so ridiculously complicated. The one that did the ventilation, not the heating. The heating and cooling one is cool because it takes the place of these PTAC units that are in hotels. Those through-wall horrible units. That's pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know yet about Apaca, but I think James does. Don't you?
Yeah, we installed one Apaca for a backyard office pod.
Yeah.
And we've been looking at them for other things, but that's just the heating and cooling heat pump.
Right.
And it was really, really simple. It was terrific.
Yeah, it looks that way. Are there any specific? No. Did you have to go through the state in order to be permitted to only have a single electric meter? No. I mean, Pico, which is our utility, allowed it. They had no problem with it. And the rules around it are, in some states, it's just not allowed because you're not allowed to be a utility. In other words, you're not allowed to charge people for electricity. That would make you a utility. Philadelphia, you're actually allowed if it is within or below, and I think specifically, it might even be below. If it's below no, I think it's the same. I don't exactly remember the cost per kilowatt hour that Pico charges. If you charge the same, you can't charge more. And so we charge a lot less per kilowatt. In fact, we don't charge per kilowatt hour. We charge a flat rate. And I think there's even a way around that. If the utility allows you to have 1 meter, you should be able to say, we're not charging people for utilities. We are not charging people for utilities. We are simply charging them rent, utilities included. And so there's an argument to be made there, I think. Now, your rent has an extra fee in there for utilities, but it's not utilities, it's rent. VRF PTAC, about VRF PTAC units that are starting to appear in the market. VRF PTACs, I haven't seen VRF PTACs. So here's what I think about VRF. I just don't like VRF. I've had, they're really expensive. They're really expensive to install, and they're really expensive to maintain. That's been my experience. I would love to talk to any developer that's put in a VRF and never had a leak. Never had a leak in the refrigerant. And that's the other reason I don't like them, is because you've got miles of refrigerant lines running through your buildings that they're always going to leak. I've had to replace all of the valves in every single valve in my VRF system, the one with the geothermal. So I'm not a big fan of running a lot of refrigerant lines around the building. I'm also not a big fan of having condensers on the outside. I'm a fan of simplicity, like a packaged unit and when you say PTAC with VRF, I'm assuming that you've got a condenser on the roof or the ground and you're running refrigerant to the PTAC. So I would imagine that's what.
Yeah, he's saying it's a contained unit. I think I'm familiar. It's like is it like the Friedrich VRP? Tony, feel free to unmute yourself. And they are just a through the wall variable refrigerant flow heat pump that then also does some ventilation.
What's the manufacturer?
Friedrich.
Yeah, they come in a different, they come kind of packaged differently. Michelle, I think what you're referring to is like the Magic Pack kind of, version of it. But Ice Air is one. Friedrich definitely makes one. It looks like a Magic Pack unit, kind of a vertical hotel unit that you can duct. But then Ice Air is another manufacturer, actually, strangely enough, right here in New York, that's coming out with it. And I've heard of another manufacturer. The name escapes me, but Ice Air is one that makes
how
it.
do they
The
how
performance
do they get,
level.
but how do they get ventilation air?
They don't. Yeah, ventilation's separate. It's not a self-contained. It's not like a Minutair unit. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, why?
Friedrich does ventilation, but they're just pulling air in from outside. Like it's just supply ventilation, and then it does go past one of the coils to kind of temper itself on the way in. So there's some, I guess, something more than just supply. But yeah, not too impressed with those units myself.
Yeah, and not to mention, I'm sure it's like most PTACs, like just a big old hole in the wall with a piece of metal between the outside and the inside. I mean, ew. So yeah, it's got to do ventilation. It's got to do heating, cooling, and dehumidification all in one, or I'm not looking at it. Self-contained units, okay. Anyway.
All right, it looks like there are no more questions. If anyone has another question, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Yeah, this was a great, wonderful presentation. Thank you. On the electric car front, we have a project that is looking into that as well, the electric car share, which for an affordable project makes so much sense on just every single level, including, having that peak demand shaving, but it's expensive to own a car. And if you don't need one all the time, why have everyone own one? So I hope we see a lot more of that in the future.
Well, I can tell you that the first you probably, those of you who follow EVs, the first EV coming out with a bi-directional charger is none other than the Ford F-150. And that's going to be out apparently in 2022. So, so off to the races after that.
Nice. Do you mind taking down this stop screen
Not at all.
share so we can kind of see more of everyone again?
Sorry
And
about that, yeah.
that's great. So any other questions from anyone before we kind of start wrapping up? I already mentioned this, but I'll talk about it again. Actually, Tim and I were on the jury for the Phius design competition. And we just happened to have three winners on tonight, and that's James with the Seminary Hill Cidery and Carl from River Architects. Stephanie Bassler, I don't know if she's still here, but the Gallatin Passive House, that was
Beautiful.
okay, I should say category, and I'm doing this all from memory, but that was category was James commercial. And then Stephanie's category was, I want to say single family homes, but also winner overall,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then we also have Alessandro Ruffini here, and his was the Olive Bridge or Olive Passive House, I think for professional under 35, but I could be somewhat wrong in some of those details, so please don't quote me on them. But, you know, big kudos to all of you. And if you want to share anything about your project, we have about 15 minutes left.
That says a lot about Hudson Valley. There's a lot of action going on.
Yes, there is. Representing.
Wow, I don't think I've ever been this early in my life. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, this is good. We all get 15 minutes of our evening back. So I think there's nothing else. I want to just thank everyone again for joining. Thanks again to Jeff and Sash and Frame and for your sponsorship and time, and Tim for your time and wonderful presentation, and all of you for joining us and making this a robust dialogue, as it always is. So have a good evening and keep doing the good work.
Thanks, everybody. See y'all.